Welcome back to the Picture This podcast. My next guest has transformed a multifaceted career in animation, toy design, and illustration into a captivating journey as a children's author and illustrator with a portfolio that boasts some of my favorite titles like I Hate Picture Books, The Angry Little Puffin, and If You Give the Puffin a Muffin. His works are renowned for their humor, creativity, and a unique ability to engage young minds. So join me in welcoming the fun and talented Timothy Young.
Wow, nice.
I always like the intro parts. It's like the best part when you get to pump up a friend.
I'm
That's
impressed.
that's probably a fun activity that, educators can do in school. Like write a, introduction for someone else in the class. It pumps them up and gets them excited. And
Oh,
that could be a fun writing exercise.
yeah. No, that's cool.
So your background starts with animation, puppet making, toy design, and I can see behind you like all of the bits and pieces of that creativity. How have these experiences influenced your approach to storytelling and illustration in your books?
Well, it's kind of funny in that, it wasn't planned at all for me to be an author. I never expected to be, but you do have ideas over time when you're working on toys and you're working, in animation and stuff, and you're seeing, and especially when you're working in groups of really creative people, you think, like, maybe my ideas are good too. And so I just a lot of it just came out of, wanting to tell these stories, but not expecting to be an author. I joke about it when I visit schools. I say, like, I waited a long time for somebody to come along and say, well, that's a good idea. I'll write it for you. And you draw the pictures. And nobody ever showed up to do it.
I, I,
I
I, I don't I don't know. Like my journey to this was kind of similar. I don't know if we've ever talked about this before, but I I originally when I before I got into writing, I had been working as a art director for 10, 15 years. And I was writing for myself. It was just something I did on my own because I was trying to be creative in a way that I wasn't at work. So all of that visual art stuff, all the illustration or putting images together or doing film, that was not something I wanted to do. So I was going home and I was writing and just kind of creating these poems and little stories and things like that. And I had no intention of being an author either. It just yeah, it's somebody has to kind of like poke you a little bit and say, "This is a good idea. You've got some talent. How about you try this?"
Right, right. Well, and as a matter of fact, it came directly out of a toy job that I had as I was design director for this small toy company called the Idea Factory. And we made this product called the Meanies, which was they were kind of
Mhm.
gross, humorous, parodies of Beanie Baby type things. And because Beanie Babies had poems on their hang tags, we had to come up with poems for our characters. And I ended up writing half of them that ended up on the product. Very surprising for me that I had some talent as a limerick writer.
So to bring this towards the classroom a little bit, let's talk a little bit about how you go through your character creation process. So, let's use somebody like Angry Little Puffin. What's your process for thinking about the personality or the visual identity for a character? And I'll try to think about how educators can use those techniques a little bit to, relate to their students and find ways for their students to do something.
Sure. Well, the Angry Little Puffin is actually based on a real incident in my life where I was at the Central Park Zoo in New York, and I was in this, penguin house, and there's an exhibit of puffins, and I'm there, and this guy walked by and said, "That's a funny looking penguin," and walked away. And this was like 40 years ago now. But the idea of this cute little bird being angry, kind of got to me. And I drew him a couple of times over the years, long before I was doing children's books. I actually sculpted a puffin for a project, and I thought maybe he could be like a cool comic book character, almost like he hulks out. And I actually have a drawing that I did of this very muscular, angry puffin that I show sometimes when I talk about his inception. But then when I started writing the books, I thought, well, all right, so I can have this character tell his story And when I started, the idea was that he breaks out of his cage and goes on a big rant around the zoo. And, I didn't know where to end it after all that. So I brought it back and I made it more contained. And he's actually just in his exhibit at the Penguin House, and just tells his story. And I had a lot of fun stylizing him as well. I went through a number of iterations of what he would look like before I came up with this visual where you only see one of his eyes and his mouth is on the side of his head. If you were sculpted him in 3D, and he looks kind of weird because of that. But as a drawing, it works.
So do you do you talked about he hulks out, but do you do when you're creating a character, do you do here's what he would look like if his hair was really fluffy, and here's what he would look like if his hair wasn't fluffy at all, so you can find a middle ground or a way that you like it, or how does that part of the process?
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of thumbnails of different possibilities. And in one of my how to draw books, I've got a whole bunch of the sketches that I did of him early on, because he's feathered and they look very smooth, like penguins and other, like Arctic birds. There wasn't a lot of like, oh, he should have a big afro or something like that. But with some of my other characters, I do think a lot about who they are and who they represent. Like with the kid in I Hate Picture Books, who didn't have a name until after the story was completely done. I named him Max because I figured his parents bought him so many books that they'd name him after their favorite
Uh,
character.
yeah.
But, I started drawing. I knew he had to be cute, but I also knew he had to look cute angry because he spends half the book ranting about things, and it's so you don't want to make somebody look ugly while they're
So, do you typically find your inspiration in in things that happen to you, the real world around you, or do you sometimes just sit and stare at the wall for a little while and come up with ideas?
Yeah, I'm not a sit and stare at the wall kind of guy. I don't have like this special author chair where I go and think. It's very random where some ideas come to me. I think actually you were around. It was at a New Jersey FCBWI conference when I thought of the idea for I Hate Picture Books. And I spent most of the weekend of that conference rolling that around in my head. It was because I had I was sitting around in one of the conferences and we were talking about humor in picture books. And we started talking about parody. And I thought, well, what books could I parody? I wouldn't want to settle on one. I got to make fun of all of them. So that's where the inception of that one came from. And a lot of times I've actually, and I tell this story in schools, I've written 3 of my books on long car journeys. I just recently revisited a school whose earlier visit in 2017, on the way there, I had the idea for my book Untitled. And I got to the school and I told the librarian all about it. She was very, very excited. And a couple of years later, I was able to send her, an actual copy of it. So,
That's really cool. So I used to write stories in my head. I had a hour long commute to and from work every day, so that was 2 hours that I was writing in my head. And I wonder if that's a reason that I am not as prolific now. I have to drive more. No, I've actually it's much harder to write chapter books in your head.
yeah.
Picture books. I love picture books. I am the opposite of your Max, who I don't know that we ever talked about his name. I think he was still unnamed when you gave me my copy of that
Well,
book.
his name only appears on the back cover of the book. It's mentioned on the back because there was no way to go back into the story and
In
find
the
a way to
story
put it.
and
'Cause,
my
I'm sure you appreciate this. I'm not the kind of writer who tells a story. I've had so many people say to me, "You start a story with, 'Hi, my name is Max.'" No, you don't. You started a great story by throwing the reader into the middle of it and letting them extrapolate and understand over time reading the story what's going on. They don't have to get it right away.
Yeah, you can let them come to the story,
Right,
right? And that could be a fun exercise. There's got to be a way to build something around create a story. What is the most important part of that story, the best part of that story? Now start your story there. Get rid of everything before that. Now
right.
start your story there. And then what happens? Or even just taking a book that we already have and saying, here's the part where Max does this. Let's start the story here, take it to the end. And is that the end still, or does it carry beyond that because we changed the beginning?
Right. A lot of teachers and librarians have come up with some fun activities around that where they ask kids like, all right, what book makes you angry? What book do you, think is,
Yeah, yeah. What books make you mad? That's good because I think I have a couple thousand books in my Goodreads that I've been, that I keep track of, and I think there's only about 4 or 5 that I didn't finish, and I'm really angry at those books that I couldn't finish them. I feel like it's insulting to the author that you don't finish a book, and I'm just angry at those books. So you have a really great way of blending humor with a meaningful message in your story. Is there techniques that you use to strike a balance, to strike that type of balance that we could pass on?
wow, techniques. I don't know. I I write for myself. I'm my first audience. I don't really think about like a message until I start to get into it a little bit and start to realize, all right, well, here's a place where I can throw, like in the case of the Puffin books, I can throw a fact in there that the Puffin tells the reader that they'll know something is true, like the fact that they eat fish, squid, and sand eels instead of muffins in the case of them. And I try to make sure that they're accurate in there. And in terms of a message, you don't you want to, even if it's a story about anger or somebody, misinterpreting something, you want to make sure that it has a nice ending. It doesn't have to be like the best ending. It doesn't have to be like everything is solved and everyone lived happily ever after, but it has to resolve itself in a way that the reader is satisfied.
Yeah, I want my hat back, right?
Yeah.
It ends a certain way
And
depending on
that's
how
to
you
someone's interpretation.
yeah, yeah, it ends a certain way depending on how you interpret it. It ends a certain way, so it does leave things kind of open, and maybe some people don't like that, but I love the fact that I can believe that something got ate in a book,
Right.
and a lot of kids enjoy that part of it.
Well, in my opinion, he's either eaten or he's being sat on.
I like that interpretation too.
It's like with my book Untitled, I made a what I thought was a very funny joke at the end of it, where the characters, because they're discussing their situation, and one says, "Well, I hope he writes a sequel and gets us out of here." And of course, every school I visit now is, "Well, are you going to write that sequel?" And I explain that I have like the beginning of a sequel, but I don't have an end of the sequel yet, so I don't know if it's ever going to happen. But I also think it's kind of funny to just leave them hanging where they are and never writing a sequel. So I'm of two minds about
That's so. I don't know. Are you familiar with "This Is a Good Story"?
it.
So my book, "This Is a Good Story," the way that it ends is the henchman sets the evil overlord free, and I get that question a lot as well. Are you going to write a sequel? And my answer now is I leave it open so
Right.
that you can write the sequel. You can take these characters now and you can do something with them, help them out, take them to a new place, and be creative with it.
And
And
a lot of teachers have done assignments. I go to a school and there's a wall of other possible sequels to Untitled that kids have written.
that's fantastic. I love that. So that would be one of the activities. So look below the posts on my website. Go there, look for the Timothy Young section, and there will be an activity related to writing a sequel to his book Untitled. That'll be a fun activity we can include. You've conducted a, a ton of school visits and workshops. What have you found most effective in capturing and maintaining the attention of your audience? What are the things that you feel like they get most into?
Gosh, it's funny because I was just talking about this with someone. I've been doing it now for 15 years. I started doing school visits when I had one book, one pop up book that takes about 2 minutes to read. And I had to fill 45 minutes of presentation. I did a heck of a lot more drawing then. I love drawing with the kids. It's a lot of fun. But now over time I've developed this program that has a lot more to it. And I've done a couple of things that really work. Well, it's funny because over time you don't want to make it I never wanted to make it a bit. I don't want to make it like you come in, you watch my show and then you leave. It's very interactive. And I've been able to invent my presentation in a way that I read a couple of my books to start off that kind of sets the mood. But then I immediately go into questions from the audience because I have about 10 hours of material in my slideshow depending on what questions are asked. And so each presentation is completely different because I'm riffing off of what the kids are asking and what they're interested in. And they're really enjoying the fact that they they can't stump me. No one has ever asked me a question that I'm unable to answer, and oftentimes have a visual for that answer that I can jump to.
That's
Because
that.
slideshow is nonlinear. I can get to anywhere within it, in a click or two, and so it stays very fresh and fun for them and for me, for each presentation.
And that's really an important part of a good school visit is it needs to be fresh, especially if you're going back to a school every once in a while. I know you've had repeat visits. You want it to be fresh, even though it's new students. The educators are going to have fresh things. It's going to be a little bit different. You're going to share new things. And I like to, even for my visits, I like to kind of riff on what people are doing. We always create things. And so I like to bring in some old like fireside storytelling activities and create things. So we create characters, or we create a story, or we talk about plot and have a problem and a solution that we need to put together. Having those interactive things and having the audience participate is a huge win
Yeah.
for a school visit.
Well, and the other thing I try never to do is I don't talk down to anybody. I'm one of them. I'm no different than I was when I feel like I'm 12. So I'm treating them as friends. But I also throw things in that the teachers enjoy too. They don't go over the kid's head, but they're things that like as an adult they'll appreciate. Like whenever they ask about the work I did before, and I bring up Pee-wee's Playhouse. It's all the teachers who get very excited because they're the right age that they were kids when I was working on that show. And I love it when a teacher asks a question that maybe one of the students wouldn't have thought of, but it gives me a chance to answer that both for the teacher satisfaction and the kids learn something new because of that as
It
well.
it is kind of a fun thing that history when somebody introduces you and they're, how do I introduce you? How do I talk about you? It's like, look, you can say whatever you want. You can talk about the things I've done in my past because I have done some really cool things, or you can just talk about the book and what I'm here for today. Let this audience. These are your people. These are your students. And I'm here to entertain, educate, and to get them jazzed about being creative beings out in the world,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the other side of it too, is like sometimes you go into a school and the kids have been prepared for weeks about you and your books, and they've read everything, and they've got tons of questions that they already know that they want to ask. And that's a lot of fun. I was in a school recently where they even had like a whole gym full of games set up themed around my books. I mean, that was just really cool. But on the other hand, sometimes you go into a school and, it's kind of maybe that they didn't have time to prepare, and or the librarian's overwhelmed by what she has to do normally and didn't really do much to prepare for your visit. But it doesn't matter because within minutes of the presentation starting, they're understanding where things are going. By the time I leave the school, I come in a complete unknown that nobody would recognize, and I leave a rock star, being high fived by everybody going down the hallway because it's a fun presentation. And again, I don't go in there and preach. I don't go in there and talk down. I'm one of them, and they get into it. You get fifth graders who come in thinking, like, why am I listening to a guy about picture books? And then when they find out what more it's about, they get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the same, the full gamut. With some been at a school visit where they set up a full petting zoo for my chicken books, and
Right?
there were chickens and pigs and tiny little goats. And then I've been to other schools. I mean, I've got a local school that I've been to a couple of the different elementary schools, and the same librarian is at all of them. So, she's here one day, there another day, and there just isn't time to put together some of those kinds of activities and themes. So hopefully the Picture This podcast and blog are a great resource for just a cheat sheet for simple things that you can do to get things going. And make your next author visit, much, much easier on your schedule and your time. So I'm going to do two last things. So I have a section that I do with everybody called Adam's Book Bag. And this is where we talk about one of your books or maybe somebody else's book that you find yourself referencing when you're doing your presentations kind of all the time. It's like a go-to for me when if I'm talking about problems and solutions, I have several go-to books that I will dig into and say, all right, um, here's a book that has a really big problem. Zach O'Hara's No Fitz Nilsson. What's the problem? Well, the problem is, well, Nilsson keeps having these outbursts. Okay. The plot of the story is how do we solve for that? So what is your story or what is your book that you find yourself going to and holding it up as an example of something that you talk about a lot?
All right. So one of the things that I bring with me all the time is my copy of The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. And I explained there's a number of reasons why this is my favorite book in the world. One is that Dr. Seuss was a huge, part of my childhood. And when I was a teenager, I got to perform street theater as the Lorax, where I got to be the Lorax. My friend was the Onceler. We got people in the crowds to be truffula trees and we chopped them down. It was very dramatic. Then when I was in college,
That's a great classroom activity.
when I was in college, Dr. Seuss appeared at a bookstore in New York City. And I got there and it was one of the rare times he was out because he was very old, but my copy is signed.
So cool.
And so I don't like lock this up in a safe somewhere where it really should be. I bring it to the schools and I show the kids. And the funniest thing, just a few weeks ago, I was at a school in Pennsylvania and I've written about this online. Somebody did their research. One of the kids said, "Can you do the Lorax voice?" I haven't done that since I was a teenager. And I thought, wow, can I? So since I had the book, I turned to one of the first pages of Lorax dialogue. And somewhere from deep inside of me, I was able to pull, I'm not going to do it here, but
It's
like,
only for school visits, special school visits.
yeah,
You can hear him do the Lorax.
I was able to remember how I did the voice.
That's awesome. So the last thing that I make everybody do, we talk about story sparks,
Mhm.
right? So that's a little bit of getting the creative energy going, something that an educator could use in the classroom. And I like to talk about this with either reluctant creators, reluctant readers, reluctant writers. But when thinking about some of the conversations we have, I'm thinking story sparks around creative blocks when you have a little deadline coming up and you have to come up with those last three things. What is maybe an exercise that we could suggest or a trick that we can suggest for jumpstarting that creative engine?
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, I find, just getting out of where you are and putting yourself into a different situation often helps. Like I said, the way driving in my car I mean, kids can't do that, but take a walk, go to the library, and just look around at other people's stuff. That's always a great way. I mean, I don't know any writers who steal from one another, but they get inspiration from seeing what other people have done and stories that are a challenge that you want to live up to, like what everybody else is doing. You want to make sure your stuff is equal, if not exceeding.
Yeah. So using other people for inspiration or an activity that you really enjoy for inspiration is a great way to jumpstart those creative juices.
And I love parody. I love good parody, which is why a large percentage of my books poke fun at other things that people. I love throwing visual jokes in, just so that people could say, "Oh my, I recognize that. That's so cool."
And it really is a skill. Lighthearted parody is a skill. It can't be mocking, right?
No,
And I don't think we wanna go with something that's gonna teach mocking anyway, but that enjoyable, lighthearted parody where it really comes from a love of the material or the thing that you're making fun of is something that you really have gotten down very well. So I'll see if I can come up with an activity around that as well. a fun way to parody. Pick something that you love and what you love about it the most, and look for a way to kind of joke about it in a way that might make other people laugh about that thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to thank you very much for joining me today. It has been a pleasure to speak with you, to catch up with you, to get a little glimpse into the world that is a school visit with Timothy Young.
Well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing all the other authors that you're having on.
Yeah,
Be exciting.
it's a lot of fun. And before we sign off, where can people find you? I know I'm going to put the links on my site, but where can people find more information about you?
So my website is creaturesandcharacters.com. If you just put in, Timothy Young author into Google, I come up multiple times. So I'm not hard to find, which is nice.
Excellent. Well, as usual, thank you for joining us on this episode of Picture This. And like, comment, share. If you know somebody, a friend, colleague, coworker, parent, aunt, uncle, pet owner who you think might be a fun interview, put that in as well. We're always looking for people who are interested in finding fun ways to connect with authors and illustrators that are coming up today.